So what is this third synthesis? What is this pure and empty form of time? And this is the point, anyone who's read differential electrician, this is the point where things become even more kind of opaque and very difficult to grasp. Nevertheless, it's possible to make sense of it if we bear in mind the strictures that Deleuze has set for himself in his prior critique of representation and his commitment to univocity. The third synthesis is invoked in order to synthesize duration as an intensive or virtual whole, i.e. the pure past, with the present as its most contracted point. And this is the famous Bergsonian account of duration, with the Bergsonian cone, where you have the present, which is the point of the intersection between matter and memory, or between space and time, as merely the most contracted form of a continuum of duration, of virtual duration, which is the whole of time, or the whole memory of the past. And that which Deleuze, and there's a complicated account where all this, the layers of it there are different layers, different degrees of contraction and decontraction, which correspond to different layers, different rhythms and frequencies of duration, of temporal differentiation. So, if the third synthesis is invoked in order to synthesize duration as an intensive or virtual whole, i.e. the whole of time with the present, the contraction of the living present, then this is a synthesis between unequal portions. It is the relation between the whole of time in memory and its most contracted point at the intersection with space. So the virtual past and the actual present coexist as two odd, unequal halves, between which there can be no common measure. And the role of the third synthesis is indissociable from the problem of actualization. In other words, the problem of actualization is about finding a common measure for these two odd, unequal halves, the virtual and the actual, the two halves of the object. The problem of actualization is, how does the pure a priority of the virtual past, which is always already to come, because it's always already there before any present is contracted, how does this past become converted into an actual present which is necessarily later than it? What is required is an ordination of time which will distribute a before, a during, and an after in a static synthesis. And that's Deleuze's own expression, a static synthesis. The simultaneity of a static synthesis. The ordination of time entails separating its pure form from its chronologically sequenced empirical contents. And hence, it's this ordination which, in Deleuze's peculiar expression, throws time out of joint. This is, Deleuze famously credits Kant, the Kantian discovery of time as the transcendental form of determination, as the prizing free of time, the prizing free of the pure and empty form of time from its subordination to space, to cardinal measure, to the measure of movement. The traditional definition of time being, the famous Aristotelian definition being, time is the measure of movement. And movement is measured by cardinal sequences, which measure periodic movement. So time's joints are these cardinal points which measure periodic movement. So these three series are the first series of the present. This cardinal order is the first series of the present, the second series of the past, the third series of the future in an indefinite succession. So long as time is jointed or subordinated to the number of movement, all we have are nested successions of repetition, each of which remains external to the other. There is no common measure between the first, the second, the third. The function of the third synthesis is to distribute this unequal series without subordinating them to a measure of movement or a successive series of repetitions. And paradoxically, this can only occur through a break, or what Deleuze will call a caesura, which distributes the series independently of the measure of succession. So it is this caesura, this crack, this splitting, which orders the series in a fixed and static structure that is no longer bound to the dynamic determinations of time's empirical content. And here, there is, I think, a real relationship to Heidegger's own account of temporalization. And it was striking, what Heidegger calls the ekstatikon, in and for itself. Time as that which is always disjointed, which is outside of itself, and so it can't be spatially represented, is necessarily static. So it contradicts our ordinary intuitions about the way in which time is necessarily sequentially articulated, as if time is a matter of moving from the future through a present into a past. Okay, now this, there's no point in pretending. I mean, this marks the crisis in the paper where there's a chunk missing, where Deleuze relates this account of the pure and empty form of time to the death drive in a discussion of Freud. And also links it to an account of the ultimate constituents of psychic individuation, i.e. Okay, and this is the missing chunk, the fatally missing chunk of the paper. But I'll try to kind of go on to what the philosophical. Basically, I'll try to at least sketch the movement that needs to be kind of articulated in this missing. So the point, the third synthesis. If psychic individuation occurs through the third synthesis of time, then Deleuze links this to the problematic of recurrence, the affirmation of returnal recurrence, which is what differentiates the structure of time, or temporalizes time. And the point is that psychic, it seems that in Deleuze's account, description of the relationship between this death and psychic individuation, is that the third synthesis becomes the differentiator of difference at the level at an ontological level. In other words, it has all of the spatial and the temporal orders supervene on this ultimately individuating psychic instance. And this, I think, complicates Deleuze's account of the relationship between his critique of representation and his account of univocity. The relationship between, if Deleuze is seen as a Spinozist, then he's simply recoding the difference between substance, attribute, and modes in terms of the distinction between temporal differentiation, ideas as virtual singularities, and intensive individuations. And Deleuze famously wants to flatten substance onto the modes and have the attributes, which is to say the intent, the ideas, the dialectical ideas, the problematic singularities, become the locus for individuating difference in being.